Tiny in All That Air, the Philip Larkin Society podcast.
Hello and welcome to Tiny in All That Air, the Philip Larkin Society podcast. My name is Lynn and I'm the Deputy Chair of the Philip Larkin Society. We have developed a bit of a tradition of recording readings of Larkin's poems. Obviously, we always encourage our podcast guests to read their favourite Larkin poems, but back in 2021 we decided to celebrate what would have been Larkin's 99th birthday with an open invitation for anyone to read their favourite Larkin poem. And we had so many responses that we had to put out 2 episodes. In 2022, the centenary year, our honorary vice presidents introduced and read the poems of their choice. And in 2024, we decided to read the whole of High Windows to celebrate 50 years since its publication. So we now had the poetry bit between our teeth, and we decided that this year we should celebrate the 70-year anniversary of the publication of The Less Deceived with another full reading. We begin with an introduction to the collection with regular attendees of the podcast, our chair, Graham Chesters, and trustee, Philip Pullen, and we reflect on some of the history of the publication of The Less Deceived and some of their very special readings.
The interesting thing, obviously Belfast is huge in this, but we mustn't forget that some of these poems had their gestation period in Leicester, so it's a mix between the two, mostly in Belfast. All of the poems, bar one, can't remember which one now, was either written in Leicester or Belfast, and the majority of them were written in Belfast. So it's a kind of combination of, in a way, the two places.
Because the earliest poem is Going, isn't it? 1946.
Yeah, that's the one. In fact, doing a little bit of, it's interesting to compare it with High Windows, because High Windows, I think we were talking about how many of those poems sort of they spanned a long period of time in their writing, whereas here, it's quite a brief period. 45 was the first one. May 54 was the last one. So it's pretty much a concentrated period of writing for Larkin, wasn't it?
Yeah. And poems that were being written at this time that didn't actually go into The Less Deceived were either not published at all, or a number that came into later collections. So I think for Sidney Bechet, Water and Days were certainly some of the ones that I found that were written at this time that could have gone into Less Deceived, but went into later collections.
Which shows really that, I suppose, that time, especially in Belfast, was very good for writing, because he did say that, didn't he? Something about it was a good place for writing in. It seemed to be, what did he say? Best writing conditions were in Belfast.
Yeah, that's right. Interesting. I'd like your views on this. Why An April Sunday Brings the Snow isn't in any of them. It's not in the 20 poems. And it's not in, I don't think it's in The Grip of Light. Is it too personal?
I was just wondering whether, it's about the only poem that he wrote in that year, wasn't it? 48, when his father died.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's what it was, something to do with the very, very personal nature of it.
Yeah, because the same, I was thinking about Mother Summer Eye, because, again, a very personal poem about Eva, and that also wasn't put into a collection.
I hadn't realised until doing some reading this morning, I think it was probably James I was reading, the alternative titles that he had for the one that seems to have stuck longest and not used was various poems.
Yes.
But one of the others was Such Absences.
Yeah.
And because he wanted to draw attention to his favourite poem. which it always mystifies me why that's his favourite poem. But he repeats that, over the years. But then he decided against such absences, according to what I was reading, that because clearly the book, he wasn't absent from the book in the same way that he's absent from the seascape. It's not attics cleared of him, in fact, it's attics which have got quite a lot of him in them.
Really is. Yeah. I was wondering the same thing about that title, the original title, Various Poems. I was wondering whether we would be still talking about this volume in the same way if it had simply been called Various Poems. I think it was George Hartley who was partly, the person who managed to persuade Larkin to change that title. And presumably he had an eye on it as a publisher as well.
Yes.
And how it would sell.
Various Poems is very self-deprecating, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It would slip under the radar. It doesn't draw attention to itself. Whereas The Less Deceived is a much more bold title, more mysterious title. Yeah.
And a clever title, really. I think looking at James's biography, he talks about how it has multiple applications, that abstract noun phrase that he describes it. For example, in the poem Deceptions, as it was then called, the raped girl in Deceptions is less deceived than her rapist. But then again, the visitor in church-going is less deceived than the religious believer. And also in terms of absences, his eternal attic full of selfish clutter is perhaps more deceived than a poet of absences whose attics are sublimely empty, where Larkin didn't quite get to, perhaps. But a clever title.
I was reading for the first time, actually, Phil, a document that you'll have seen before about the interview with in the Babylonian with the teenage editor.
The young sixth former, yes.
Yeah, and one of the questions is something along the lines as you come across as a disillusioned poet, right? And his answer was, I can't be disillusioned because I didn't have any illusion in the first place, which is, it's something of that in the title, The Less Deceived, that, that if you start from a position of being under no illusion, clear-eyed, then it's very difficult to feel deceived or disappointed or disillusioned. So it's quite, and that was 1975, so we're talking 20 years after. It's just struck me as a kind of standard protection that he had against that accusation.
So The Less Deceived was published in 1955 by the Marvel Press, who are based in Hull, and it's a momentous occasion for Larkin in lots of ways, isn't it? Because it's not his first collection, it's the second collection. But the first collection that perhaps people would sort of recognise as a collection of Larkin poems if you didn't know who'd written it, which is very different from the North Ship. So the North Ship was the first collection. What year was the North Ship published?
46, isn't it?
Is it 46? So it was only 24.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point, Lynn. I'm noticing, at least in my copy of The Less Deceived, which was I'm not boasting here, but it is a first edition. Opposite the title page, it says, by Philip Larkin, A Girl in Winter, bracket, Faber and Faber. It doesn't mention the North Ship, and it doesn't mention Jill. And I'm a bit puzzled why. I mean, he mentioned Girl in Winter and put underneath Faber and Faber, so, well, there's some sort of kudos coming to the Marvel press in a way that wouldn't be there for the Fortune press, I guess.
Yeah, it might be something to do with that. I mean, I'm looking at a much more up-to-date version where all of the publications are named, but apart from the Northship being there, there's also 20 poems, which was which of course he had published privately, didn't he?
Yeah.
And some of the poems in 13 of the poems in The Less Deceived were originally published in 20 poems, so they'd had that outing there.
Yeah.
And several, of course, the other important thing is several were published in Listen, the poetry journal that the Hartleys edited, which was his first connection with them. They're very important, I think, in the whole story, aren't they, of how The Less Deceived eventually came about and how it was presented.
Yes, we've talked before about the importance of journals and being published in journals and newspapers for Larkin, and at this time he was submitting his poems to be published in journals, and he sent these poems to Listen. He's seen the first edition of Listen and thought that seemed like a suitable place for some of his poems, and Spring and Dry Point and Toads were published in the second edition of Listen in 1953. I don't have any copies of Listen. Do you two have any?
Yeah, I've got them all apart from one.
How many were published in total?
You'll find volume 1 to 8, but 2 of the volumes, I think it's 3 and 4, which were published at the same time and under a single cover. It's because of the George and getting behind time. People want to know when they're coming out, and in the end, they made the decision to publish 3 and 4 as a single book. So I think there are 8 volumes, but only 7 books, as it were. They are quite marvellous things, really, and I can see why Larkin would have been attracted to them, and because the company is keeping. And, that's what's extraordinary about it. Yeah. And other poets clearly felt the same thing.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, there were other poets of note I can't remember all of them now, but they really went out for the big names, didn't they, when they started that out? Ted Hughes is in there, and the covers themselves are incredible. In terms of the artwork. So it's no wonder that he was attracted by that journal.
Yes. And obviously just run by George and Jean Hartley in their very small house in Hull. An absolute cottage industry. That's
how she describes it, isn't it?
And I
could just imagine his first meeting with them in that sense, what he was imagining and what the reality of that was. And for them too, Jean Hartley describes it very, very clearly in her autobiography, doesn't she? How he'd come along on his bike and this huge man standing there.
Yes, it's a lovely description of him with his rucksack full of groceries and Hammonds.
For anyone who hasn't read Jean Hartley's book about Philip Larkin, the Marvel Press and Me, it is absolutely fantastic book. It's a real page turner.
It is, yeah.
And the friendship between Philip Larkin and Jean Hartley is very beautifully described.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And it's consistent and it survives everything, doesn't it?
So Jean was involved with the early days of the society as well, wasn't she? Yeah.
She was, yeah. Yes, she rolled her sleeves up. She was the one who was the original editor, really, and got things going.
I think that's really one of the lovely things about the society, actually, and the fact that we, contain that we have that connection right back to Larkin. And I'm talking now about The Less Deceived in particular, about how that came about. I had an email recently from Alison Hartley, Jean and George's daughter, and she mentioned in one of my emails that we were putting this program together, this podcast together, and she hadn't realised that it was 70 years since The Less Deceived had been published, and she wrote that she had memories as a schoolgirl of doing the invoices and parcelling up the books and trudging off to Hessel Post Office with heavy bags of them, much to the annoyance of the grim woman in the post office who used to hate us for clogging up the place with all the Marvel press business. And she said, a real cottage industry.
Yeah.
You can just imagine that.
Yeah.
The daughters, I mean, when you think it's 70 years ago, and she was it sounds from her self-description there that she was a teenager, perhaps. I don't know.
I think, wasn't she?
I think she must have been younger than that, yeah. But she's a younger, Jean's younger daughter, isn't she? Lawrence, yeah.
But yes.
I'm fascinated by the way in which there's an account, it's partly in Jean but elsewhere, of the method of production and the decisions. You know, like the colour of the cover or the font that's going to be used, and Larkin was very keen on getting all those things right. But I love looking through the list of subscribers.
Oh, right, yeah.
As Larkin described them, his suckers. Because he must have, he sent in a list, I think, of people who might be interested. And because on the back cover of that first edition, it advertises Listen, quarterly review, and then gives the list of contributors. And if you compare that list of contributors with the list of subscribers, there is quite an overlap. But then there are some contributors who, for one reason or another, didn't subscribe to Larkin's poem, and that sets off another set of speculations.
The other thing that's interesting, I think, is the dedication of the book to Monica Jones. So Andrew Motion, in his biography, describes her as appearing only fleetingly, which she did in terms of the poems that you could identify her with. But in terms of other people who clearly are there are 3 poems about Winifred Arnold, for example, and 2 probably about Ruth. The publication came at an interesting point in his life, probably, in terms of relationships. And the most personal ones are in terms of relationships, the most personal ones are about Winifred, I would think.
Yeah, and then that's the one that opens the whole collection, doesn't it? Lines on a young lady's photograph album.
A poem that she didn't like. She didn't really like that poem very much, from what she said later when she gave talks. She said her favourite was Maiden Name. It's interesting. It's also about her getting married and so on.
But you can still see the photograph album in Hull, as we've talked about before on the podcast, which is always lovely to see. I was reading this morning that James says that Whatever Happened is about Patsy Strang. Just a sense of a secretive relationship. But another poem that mentions photography as well. When he talks about looking back on a day of violence and saying that all's Kodak distant, and we unhood our photometers and snap what can't be printed can be thrown away. So quite a ambiguous poem, I think, Whatever Happened. But I guess if he's going to be writing about Patsy Strang, he's going to want to keep that quite ambiguous.
I can't help but say that he's not writing about Patsy Strang. He's writing about Winifred Arnold.
No, that's true.
But I just pick up on what you said there, Lynn, about the ambiguity of the poem, Whatever Happened. And I'm all for ambiguity. I mean, you don't make a career out of being clear or examining clear poets. But I notice on the inside cover, the blurb, in other words, of the first edition, which is written, I imagine, by George Hartley. Larkin supplied him with a text, a kind of introduction, and he's used quite a lot of it, or he's changed certain words, but it more or less mean the same thing, which I think would have annoyed Larkin. But he finishes by saying that the poetry is reinforced by the importance Larkin attaches to clarity of thought and syntax. Right? Clarity of thought and syntax. And you mentioned the ambiguity of whatever happened. I mean, there are some poems in here which I can't figure out. I mean, I certainly can't figure out just through listening to them being read. And one is Age, which is, I have no idea what it means. Another, and there are parts of If My Darling, which I think are difficult to unscramble. And he says as much, really, doesn't it? Each one double yoked with meaning and meaning's rebuttal. It's a kind of self-reflection here. This is where if you get into my mind, this is what you're going to come across. And then I still don't understand the ending of Toads. I don't say one bodies the other, one spiritual truth, but I do say it's hard to lose either when you have both. You know, I think, what's that about? And so it may be normal syntax, but I wouldn't describe that as an example of clarity. And that's not a criticism.
No, I think it's true of a lot of Larkin poems. I came across Dry Point is an interesting one in terms of things that you're trying to work out why he's put a certain line in, and one line that stood out was Birmingham Magic all discredited. I came across a blog online which, referring to that, said, we don't read Larkin for poems that need explaining. but I mean, assuming that Birmingham Magic is to do with the jewellery quarter in Birmingham, which we're told about, with the sort of tawdry jewellery and so on. But I think it wouldn't be right to assume that you can read Larkin's poems straight off like that. There's lots of things in there that you can get under the surface of. And try and make sense of, and not maybe end up making sense of all of it, as we've just been saying. It'd be wrong to think that it's purely straightforward anyway.
Yeah. That's what's interesting about some of the readings. I think that the confidence of some of the readings suggest a lack of ambiguity. Somehow that they've taken the stance on a syntax or the inflection or the tone, and which you pretty have to, because you can't really contain multiple readings.
With our readers, we have some monikers and Larkins here, because we've got some of the actors that we've got to know over the years. I really like Daniel Wain's reading of Reasons for Attendance.
That's astonishing, isn't it? I thought it's almost Shakespearean in the way that he reads that. Yeah. And then that laugh at the end.
The laugh at the end. Yeah. I feel like Danny's taken himself on as if it was Larkin, maybe, or a kind of interpretation of Larkin himself saying this poem, perhaps. I like how, as an actor, he's able to bring out the conversational, discursive aspect of Reasons for Attendance.
Yes.
Yeah, you can tell the actors, can't you?
You can.
You can,
And, you can see why they're actors and why they're brilliant at their job.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Astonishing reading of Church Going.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Church Going is in Tom Courtenay's DNA, because I think a lot of it's recited in Pretending to Be Me. I don't know if he reads the whole of it. But I know he said that he did used to be able to read or recite Church Going from memory. Yeah, so it's a beautiful reading. It brings the poem so much to life.
Do you think that poem makes The Less Deceived?
I would say so. It's a blockbuster in there for me.
Yeah.
And it's in terms of where it fits in the volume. is good too, because it's in the middle somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it's almost dead in the middle.
Yeah, I do think that. Yeah,
I think James Underwood said it's a masterpiece at the centre of a masterpiece.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a nice way of putting it, I think.
Yeah, and I think I don't know whether it's right or not, but probably a lot of people assume that this poem reflects Larkin's travels around churches in England, because obviously he spent most of his life here, and you think about him on his bike in the Monitor programme around the churches in the South Bank and in Hull. Although this poem was actually written about the church visiting in Northern Ireland, which adds a little something else to that line about the Irish sixpence that's donated at the end.
And James Booth compares it to T.S. Eliot's poetry writing about religion. Larkin said this isn't a religious poem because a religious poem suggests, a presence of God, and he says, God is not in this poem. This is not what I'm writing about. But at the same time, we have this need for these buildings that they give something to it.
There's a very good essay by Trevor Tollian about Larkin 18, which people can read online if they go to the website, which is about the less deceived, and he reflects that he makes that comparison with Eliot as well around four quartets, I think, and church going. But more particularly, he also talks about how, and this is probably something we can't quite get at looking at it from this distance, how striking that volume was when it came out, and how different it was from previous poetry. There was something quite astonishingly new about it. And the variety that we get within the volume. I think it's well worth a read, actually. I think it was a lecture he gave maybe for one of the PLS events way back 2002, I think it was, something like that. But it makes a good read.
One of the attractions of that title that lasted quite a long while, Various Poems, is that Various captures the variety.
Yeah,
they're diverse and various. Because it sounds quite casual, doesn't it? Various, but if you've got a hint of the structure about it, I think. One thing that struck me is you might imagine is the echoes of French poetry in this collection. And I remember being struck by that when I first read it, and without picking up on some of the work that Barbara Everett did, and others have, Andrew Motion as well. And I think he picked up that more in Belfast than he did in Leicester. Obviously, if you go back to Sugar and Spice and Coleman, and there's quite a definite French theme there. I'm not sure about the Leicester period, whereas in Belfast he knew Arthur Terry, and Arthur Terry was, he was a Spanish specialist, but he pointed him towards French poetry and lent him a book of 9 French poets or something like that. And so when he says, of absences, the last line sounds like a French symbolist, and I think Arrivals, Departures and Poetry of Departures, both for me have got echoes of big symbolist themes. And the one that really struck me, and other people haven't mentioned it so much, is Latest Face. Baudelaire in particular talks about a glimpse of a very striking woman in a Parisian street, and all he has is that glimpse, and yet in his own mind she becomes a kind of statue. So the glimpse of solidified, and those themes are in, I think, Latest Face. So it's just a reinforcement, really. And I think James Underwood makes the point. The less deceived grows out of Brunette Coleman and the very early poems, and one of the ways in which he tries to illustrate that is through the kind of Frenchness of some of the poems.
Oh, that's interesting.
I wonder, I think it goes back to the fact that Belfast was such an important environment for Larkin at that time, coming out of where he was in. I mean, when he left Leicester, obviously he'd been in a university environment in Leicester, but it was a very different set of living conditions. He lived rather unhappily with his mother at that time, and going to Belfast was an escape from that, an escape from other commitments back home. But he found himself in somewhere that I guess was in some ways akin to being back at Oxford, in terms of the life he led. Anyway, you know, he was living in the university, he was living in accommodation, but with more privileges than he'd had as a student, and more confidence as well. And he was meeting with a number of academics who he would share that kind of background with, and those were part of the writing conditions, I suppose, that he talks about.
Yes, I mean, just a personal reminiscence. When I was at Queen's for 2 years, I was struck more than I had been at Swansea when I was on the staff briefly, by the ease with which staff from different departments came across each other. So, you know, I had a good friend who was an archaeologist, another one a philosopher, another one in politics, somebody, not surprisingly, in English. But there seems to be that kind of social mix and opportunities for it, which I guess lies behind Larkin's friendship with Arthur Terry, for example.
Yes.
When we were talking earlier just about actors reading, and we do have a high number of actors in here, Kate Blanchett's readings are quite remarkable.
Sublime, yeah.
We're very privileged to have her read these two poems. Born Yesterday, she reads, and just the richness her voice brings to that, a sort of, and I really like hearing the female voice as well. And I have tried quite hard with this to try and have a good balance of male and female voices, because I know, as we were saying earlier, it brings a different perspective. You know, hearing Justine Gobert reading Toads, for example, and Kate Blanchett reading Born Yesterday, you hear a different, I don't know, it just brings something to the poem, different perspective. I think Born Yesterday is such an amazing poem to be written by a young man in the 1950s, because I feel like I know we've said this before about sort of Larkin the feminist, and I think you could argue that you've sort of got this here, that it's about not expecting a woman to achieve greatness through being beautiful or physically attractive, but actually through being, you know, skilled and vigilant and just catching happiness. I love that phrase, unemphasised, enthralled catching of happiness.
Yeah.
I find it a very moving poem.
It's an extremely moving poem, and in a way, this isn't the right word for it, but it's a kind of commissioned poem. It's a poem around an event, and we know that, you know, Bridge for the Living and Going were commissioned, were genuinely commissioned, and Larkin struggled with them, and there's one reason, I suppose, why he, not the only reason, why he turned down a laureateship. And that, when I think about Born Yesterday for Sally Amis, you can't help thinking, well, what if he had become poet laureate? And Charles and Diana, you know, the first child, would he have been capable of writing a poem like this? Because it's unusual, isn't it? It's a beautiful poem, and I think you're right. Kate Blanchett reads it beautifully, because the way in which she reads those last 6 or 7 lines, which are very dull and prosaic. I mean, they're not. They don't spark with poetry, do they? To that extent, you know, they reinforce what he's saying. But she reads it in, well, not an exact monotone, but she pitches it perfectly, I think. So she couldn't. You couldn't do those last few lines dramatically with a great theatrical.
I think Larkin would have struggled, going back to your question about if he'd become poet laureate and being asked to commission to do this kind of thing for other people. I think he might have struggled. I think about this poem is it's very personal again.
Yeah.
Because we are, you know, clearly this is the daughter of one of his best friend. And although we have this image of Larkin disliking children, partly because he fills us with that image himself, when you look at some of the relationships he had, not just with the Amises, but I've been reading the correspondence between him and Judy Edgerton recently, and he had a very great friendship with her two daughters, writing in very, very personal terms, and they clearly liked him and he had time for them. So, I mean, in a way, poetically, this is an indication of some of that.
Yep.
And again, the complexity, really, I suppose.
The other thing that strikes me, you talk about catching of happiness there, and the word happy and happiness, I guess if you look at your concordance, then you would find quite a recurrence in Leicester Eve. It's clearly a leitmotif. But I remember I talked to Phil about this before, that in one of his interviews, Larkin is asked about happiness, and he says at one point, he defines true happiness, deep happiness, as, he gives two examples. One is passing your driving test. So it was quite a late interview. He obviously hadn't passed his driving test by then. And the other throws him back to his days in Coventry as a schoolboy, where he caught the opposing team's skipper in the deep. So catching somebody out, and that's clearly the absolute epitome of deep happiness. But catching of happiness, it's just a combination of catching and happiness, I think, which draws the two anecdotes together, if you like.
We have another poem that mentions about being happy is Coming. It's hard to summarise that poem. It's very short. But Brian Bilston, very well-loved poet who approaches poetry in a very different way from Larkin, in that he sort of offers his poems out straight away, doesn't he? His poems come to us via social media.
They do, yeah.
He tours. He's very sort of well loved by people that probably don't know a lot of poetry but will love reading Brian Bilston's poems on Facebook, for example. And he very generously read Coming and I Remember. And I think they're really interesting choices to put them together as well. Yeah. Both poems that kind of consider childhood and how we might find happiness in childhood or not. And also I Remember as a narrative poem that tells a story and takes us to a particular place, travelling on a train. Again, a train is a motif, train travel for Larkin. And I really enjoy listening to Brian reading I Remember, because he just brings out the humour. And there is humour in the Leicester Seed. I'd maybe say not as perhaps as obvious in the next two collections, but when you read Larkin's prose and when you read, for example, transcripts of speeches he gave, that they're so funny, and the poetry isn't always a place where he brings his natural humour. But it is in there when he looks out of the window at Coventry, the cycle crates from where we annually departed for their family halls. Was that where you have your roots?
Yeah. What was it that in the keynote at the conference last year, David Quantick referred to that to me about it? Sort of an advertisement for Coventry.
Yeah.
Quote that poem, "Welcome to Coventry." Yeah,
and obviously Toads is great humorous poem. Toads is one of the first poems I ever read by Larkin, or one that made an impression on me. I know it's about that sort of tension between work and not work. As a student, as a teenager at school, I just thinking, what do you do with, how do you live your life? And I think there's something about that in Toads. Larkin is a kind of outsider to society sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he's quite got where he needs to be. Of course, he was only young, and you do feel like that, don't you, particularly in your 20s and 30s.
I'm interested in the anxiety that Larkin had about publishing the Leicester Sieve, coincidentally, in the place where he's just about to get a job.
Oh, yeah.
And he was particularly worried about Toads, doesn't he? That
He was, yeah.
Because that had already been published in Liston, so he knew it was already on the streets of Hull.
But yeah, it was. He actually says, doesn't he, about what will the Vice Chancellor think of it?
Yeah.
But he also, in the same set of anxieties, includes "If My Darling," which isn't. It's quite interesting to think, well, why was he particularly worried about "If My Darling"? I can see that Toads is fairly straightforward, but yeah, I don't know the answer to my own question.
Is that suggesting that he did feel "If My Darling" is quite personal about him?
That would be what, or it could be read. Well, yes, it could easily be read as that, and he's going beyond his eyes and seeing what's on the inside. So it's almost confessional mode.
Yeah.
And he did worry about poems later on, in terms of how they'd be read by Monica, for example, didn't he? With broadcast caused him quite a few difficulties, given that it was a poem clearly about an encounter with Maid Brennan. I suppose you're always going to have that problem if you're an artist of one kind or other, and you're expressing your feelings for so it might be someone else at a different time period or whatever. I've just remembered going back to I Remember, Coventry. In the book of doodles that we're working on at the moment, there's one letter he sent to Monica with a drawing of a railway carriage with a rabbit sitting opposite a man, which is clearly Larkin, and you look out the window and it says Coventry, and he's written to her famous questions. I little thought its innocent inquiry would be put down in cold print. So there we are, the inquiry I remember. Was that, my friends smiled, where you have your roots? Innocent inquiry.
Yeah. So we're hoping to hold an event in Belfast next year. We didn't manage it this year for the actual anniversary, but we haven't finished exploring the Less Deceived.
No, I mean, that would be great if we could do that.
Yeah.
It's one of the few places associated with Larkin that we've never done a Larkin walk-in, for example.
Yeah.
The idea of doing one in Belfast is quite thrilling, I think. So yes, hopefully we'll get something together for next year.
Yeah, I think so. I find it an interesting collection. I think I spent so much time looking at High Windows last year and reading High Windows because of the conference and thinking about High Windows, crocheting High Windows, everything else. Yeah. I feel like I haven't quite got to the bottom of, in my mind anyway, I haven't quite made that journey through The Less Deceived yet. And it does have quite a number of my favourite Larkin poems in there, like Toads, like At Grass. At Grass just always moves me. That line, do memories plague their ears like flies? Something very tender about the horses, and the final lines with the groom's boy bringing the bridles in the evening. And it does remind me of those much later poems. To me, this could be a poem in High Windows.
And it's early in this sense in terms of the volume, because that's a Leicester poem.
Yeah,
is it a Leicester poem? Yeah, it's a very early poem.
Yeah, it said that he went to see he went to the cinema in Leicester, and one of the films on at the time was a little newsreel thing, I think, about Brown Jack, the famous racehorse, which was supposed to inspire him to write that. And Julian reads it very well. I mean, Julian's interest in racing is, I think, is probably reflected in that too. But I remember he read that. Julian read that poem actually on the racecourse last year when we were doing one of the walking in East Yorkshire walks up Beverley Racecourse. And you read it at the winning line of the racecourse, which gave it a particular poignancy, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it also reminded me, I was listening to it this morning, listening to Julian reading it this morning, it reminded me of Show Saturday, with the sort of listing and the kind of the language, like the cups and stakes and handicaps. There's a similar structure.
Yes.
Yes, there's a kind of more than a bit of nostalgia in it, really. It evokes something not in our past, I think. So it reminds me of 1914 sometimes. Those last two lines. It's a brilliant end to the collection, isn't it? That image of the evening come, the end of the day, end of the collection, and it's reduced down to only the groom. And then I love the groom's boy.
Yeah.
With bridals in the evening come. That's the attention that they get. It's a setting of the sun poem.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you look at that against the opening poem, Lines on a Young Lady's Photograph album, which is all about looking at things which have now passed. You've got a similar theme running through in a way.
Yeah.
Because he spent a lot of time thinking about where each poem should fit, didn't he? In all of the volumes, I suppose.
Yeah, and I like Lines. Lines is about opening up. I know it's a photo album, but it's about opening up a book, isn't it? And, you know, the first line, at last you yielded up the album, and opening up the book. And we are there with a book in our hands. I quite like that introduction to what you can find within pages.
That's right.
And he must have deliberately kept coming and going apart.
Yeah.
And it would have been so tempting in one way.
It was.
Not very nuanced, but But somebody, just going back, because I'm fascinated by this schoolboy interview where he asks Larkin, as one of the few best-selling English poets, the Leicester Sieve was, the exceptional success, wasn't it, in terms of publication? Is there any real financial return, even for a successful poet like yourself? And he more or less gives a straightforward answer. I would say no, right? But he said after 20 years, so yes, 1955 to 1975, the date of the interview, you can, by doing almost anything, this must have been an option for him, reading, lecturing, tours, editing, reviewing, and all that sort of thing, you can make a living, and I probably could. He said the great problem of the poet's life is how to get money. Because I don't think anybody, whether it was Yeats or Dylan Thomas or whether Betjeman, earns enough to live on from having publishers sell his poems. They don't. And they spend all their time going round whooping it up in one in one form or another, you know. And that wouldn't suit me. But it's a lovely description of professional poets, if you like. It would be Ted Hughes and, well, now Simon Armitage or Seamus Heaney. But
all going around pretending to be me. That's what he said. He said, I didn't want to go around pretending to be me.
Yeah. It shows that he took that interview quite seriously, didn't he, in terms of those responses? Yeah. I mean, I remember him looking at the correspondence around that when the editor of the schoolboy editor of that journal wrote to him. Larkin said something about, well, I've turned down the Observer and the Times and something like this, but this sounds less threatening, and obviously he felt comfortable with it, but treated it seriously.
It treated it seriously,
yeah. And of course, the Marvel Press did the recordings as well, and made a recording of the Leicester Sieve. And the listen cassettes, and there's a review from the Manchester Guardian at the back of the copy of the Leicester Sieve that I've got, which is it says it's a good recording, but it's sort of almost damned with faint praise. It says this record is one of the most satisfactory pieces of poetry recording I've ever heard. The most satisfactory.
Yeah. It's an astonishing listen, actually, I think. Larkin didn't like it, did he? Because he complained about the noise. There was noises in the background of the recording, which I listened to it on headphones or from Spotify, because you can listen to it on Spotify.
Yeah.
And there are some weird noises in the background. But it's always interesting hearing Larkin reading his own poems.
Yeah.
And the intonations he puts on words. I think he's a good reader. I enjoy listening to Larkin read. And you can in the Leicester Steve reading, there are one or two poems where he stumbles over words, so you can hear the stammer, always fighting the stammer. And there's a couple of mistakes in there. But I mean, they kind of add to it to me in the sense that you're kind of with him, wanting him to get to the end of the line.
Lines on a young lady's photograph album. At last you yielded up the album, which once opened sent me distracted. All your ages, matte and glossy on the thick black pages. Too much confectionery, too rich. I choke on such nutritious images. My swivel eye hungers from pose to pose. In pigtails, clutching a reluctant cat, or furred yourself, a sweet girl graduate, or lifting a heavy-headed rose beneath a trellis, or in a chorby hat, faintly disturbing that in several ways. From every side you strike at my control, not least through these disquieting chaps who loll at ease about your earlier days. Not quite your class, I'd say, dear, on the whole. But oh, photography, as no art is, faithful and disappointing, that records dull days as dull, and hold its smiles as frauds, and will not censor blemishes like washing lines and Hall's distemper boards, but shows the cat as disinclined, and shades a chin as doubled when it is. What grace your candour thus confers upon her face! How overwhelmingly persuades that this is a real girl in a real place, in every sense empirically true. Or is it just the past? Those flowers, that gate, these misty parks and motors lacerate simply by being over. You contract my heart by looking out of date. Yes, true. But in the end, surely, we cry not only at exclusion, but because it leaves us free to cry. We know what was won't call on us to justify our grief, however hard we yowl across the gap from eye to page. So I am left to mourn, without a chance of consequence. You, balanced on a bike against a fence. To wonder if you'd spot the theft of this one of you bathing. To condense, in short, a past that no one now can share, no matter who's your future. Calm and dry, it holds you like a heaven, and you lie unvariably lovely there, smaller and clearer as the years go by.
Wedding wind. The wind blew all my wedding day, and my wedding night was the night of the high wind. And a stable door was banging again and again that he must go and shut it, leaving me stupid in candlelight, hearing rain, seeing my face in the twisted candlestick, yet seeing nothing. When he came back, he said the horses were restless, and I was sad that any man or beast that night should lack the happiness I had. Now in the day all's ravelled under the sun by the winds blowing. He's gone to look at the floods, and I carry a chipped pail to the chicken run, set it down and stare. All is the wind hunting through clouds and forests, thrashing my apron and hanging cloths on the line. Can it be borne, this bodying forth by wind of joy my actions turn on, like a thread carrying beads? Shall I be let to sleep now this perpetual mourning shares my bed? Can even death dry up these new delighted lakes, conclude our kneeling as cattle by all generous waters?
No, I've never found the place where I could say this is my proper ground. Here I shall stay, nor met that special one who has an instant claim on everything I own, down to my name. To find such seems to prove you want no choice in where to build or whom to love. You ask them to bear you off irrevocably, so that it's not your fault should the town turn dreary, the girl a dolt. Yet, having missed them, you're bound none the less To act as if what you settled for mashed you, in fact, and wiser to keep away from thinking you still might trace, uncalled for to this day, your person, your place.
Coming. On longer evenings, light, chill and yellow, bathes the serene foreheads of houses. A thrush sings, laurel surrounded in a deep bare garden, its fresh peeled voice astonishing the brickwork. It will be spring soon, it will be spring soon. And I, whose childhood is a forgotten boredom, feel like a child who comes on a scene of adult reconciling and can understand nothing but the unusual laughter and starts to be happy.
Reasons for attendance. The trumpet's voice, loud and authoritative, draws me a moment to the lighted glass to watch the dancers, all under 25, solemnly on the beat of happiness. Or so I fancy, sensing the smoke and sweat, the wonderful feel of girls. Why be out there? But then why be in there? Sex, yes, but what is sex? Surely to think the lion's share of happiness is found by couples. Sheer inaccuracy as far as I'm concerned. What calls me is that lifted, rough-tongued bell, art, if you like, whose individual sound insists I too am individual. It speaks, I hear. Others may hear as well, but not for me, nor I for them. And so with happiness. Therefore I stay outside, believing this, and they maul to and fro, believing that, and both are satisfied, if no one has misjudged himself or lied.
Dry point. Endlessly, time-honoured irritant, a bubble is restively forming at your tip. Burst it as fast as we can. It will grow again until we begin dying. Silently it inflates till we're enclosed and forced to start the struggle to get out. Bestial intent, real. The wet spark comes, the bright blown walls collapse, but what sad scapes we cannot turn from then. What ashen hills, what salted shrunken lakes. How leaden the ring looks, Birmingham magic all discredited, and how remote that bare and sun-scrubbed room, intensely far that padlock cube of light we neither define nor prove, where you, we, dream obtain no right of entry.
Next, please. Always too eager for the future, we pick up bad habits of expectancy. Something is always approaching. Every day, till then, we say, watching from a bluff the tiny, clear, sparkling armada of promises draw near. How slow they are, and how much time they waste, refusing to make haste. Yet still they leave us holding wretched stalks of disappointment, for though nothing balks each big approach, leaning with brass work prinked, each rope distinct, flagged, and the figurehead with golden tits arching our way, it never anchors. It's no sooner present than it turns to past. Right to the last, we think each one will heave to and unload all good into our lives, all we are owed for waiting so devoutly and so long. But we are wrong. Only one ship is seeking us, a black-sailed unfamiliar towing at her back a huge and birdless silence. In her wake, no waters breed or break.
Going. There's an evening coming in, across the fields, one never seen before, that lights no lamps. Silken it seems at a distance, yet when it is dawn up over the knees and breast, it brings no comfort. Where has the tree gone that locked earth to the sky? What is under my hands that I cannot feel? What loads my hands down?
Once, beyond all this, the wish to be alone. However the sky grows dark with invitation cards, however we follow the printed directions of sex, however the family is photographed under the flagstaff, beyond all this, the wish to be alone. Beneath it all, desire of oblivion runs, despite the artful tensions of the calendar, the life insurance, the tabled fertility rites, the costly aversion of the eyes from death. Beneath it all, desire of oblivion runs.
Maiden name. Marrying left your maiden name disused. Its 5 light sounds no longer mean your face, your voice, and all your variants of grace. For since you were so thankfully confused by law with someone else, you cannot be semantically the same as that young beauty. It was of her that these 2 words were used. Now it's a phrase applicable to no one, lying just where you left it, scattered through old lists, old programmes, a school prize or 2, packets of letters tied with tartan ribbon. Then is it scentless, weightless, strengthless, wholly untruthful? Try whispering it slowly. No, it means you. Or, since you're past and gone, it means what we feel now about you then. How beautiful you were, and near and young. So vivid, you might still be there among those first few days, unfinger-marked again. So, your old name shelters our faithfulness, instead of losing shape and meaning less with your depreciating luggage laden.
Born yesterday. Tightly folded bud. I have wished you something none of the others would. Not the usual stuff about being beautiful or running off a spring of innocence and love. They will all wish you that. And, should it prove possible, well, you're a lucky girl. But if it shouldn't, then may you be ordinary, have, like other women, an average of talents, not ugly, not good-looking, nothing uncustomary to pull you off your balance, that, unworkable itself, stops all the rest from working. In fact, may you be dull, if that is what a skilled, vigilant, flexible, unemphasized, enthralled catching of happiness is called.
Whatever happened? At once, whatever happened starts receding. Panting, and back on board we line the rail with trousers ripped, like wallets and lips bleeding. Yes, gone, thank God. Remembering each detail, we toss for half the night, but find next day all's Kodak distant. Easily then, though pale. Perspective brings significance, we say, unhooding our photometers, and snap, what can't be printed can be thrown away. Later, it's just a latitude. The map points out how unavoidable it was. Such coastal bedding always means mishap. Curses, the dark, struggling, where's the source of these yarns now, except in nightmares, of course.
No road, Since we agreed to let the road between us fall to disuse and bricked our gates up, planted trees to screen us and turned all time's eroding agents loose, silence and space and strangers, our neglect has not had much effect. Leaves drift unswept perhaps, grass creeps unmown. No other change, so clear it stands, so little overgrown. Walking that way tonight would not seem strange, and still would be allowed. A little longer, and time will be the stronger, drafting a world where no such road will run from you to me. To watch that world come up, like a cold sun, rewarding others, is my liberty. Not to prevent it is my will's fulfilment, willing it my ailment.
Wires. The widest prairies have electric fences, for though old cattle know they must not stray, young steers are always scenting pure water, not here, but anywhere. Beyond the wires leads them to blunder against the wires whose muscle-shredding violence gives no quarter. Young steers become old cattle from that day, electric limits to their widest senses.
Church going. Once I am sure there's nothing going on, I step inside, letting the door thud shut. Another church, matting, seats and stone, and little books, sprawlings of flowers cut for Sunday, brownish now. Some brass and stuff up at the holy end, the small, neat organ, and a tense, musty, unignorable silence, brewed God knows how long. Atlas, I take off my cycle clips in awkward reverence, move forward, run my hand around the font. From where I stand, the roof looks almost new, cleaned or restored. Someone would know, I don't. Mounting the lectern, I peruse a few hectoring large-scale verses and pronounce, "Here endeth," much more loudly than I'd meant. The echoes snigger briefly. Back at the door, I sign the book, donate an Irish sixpence, reflect the place was not worth stopping for. Yet stop I did. In fact, I often do, and always end much at a loss like this, wondering what to look for, wondering too, when churches fall completely out of use, what we shall turn them into. If we shall keep a few cathedrals chronically on show, their parchment, plate and pyx in locked cases, and let the rest rent-free to rain and sheep. Shall we avoid them as unlucky places? Or, after dark, will dubious women come to make their children touch a particular stone, pick simples for a cancer, or on some advised night see walking a dead one? Power of some sort or other will go on, in games, in riddles, seemingly at random. But superstition, like belief, must die. And what remains when disbelief has gone? Grass, weedy pavement, brambles, buttress, sky, a shape less recognizable each week, a purpose more obscure. I wonder who will be the last, the very last, to seek this place for what it was. One of the crew that tap and jot and know what rude lofts were. Some ruin bibber, randy for antique, or Christmas addict, counting on a whiff of gown and bands and organ pipes and myrrh. Or will he be my representative? Bored, uninformed, knowing the ghostly silt dispersed, yet tending to this cross of ground through suburb scrub, because it held unspilt so long and equably what since is found only in separation, marriage and birth and death, and thoughts of these, for which was built this special shell. For though I've no idea what this accoutred frosty barn is worth, it pleases me to stand in silence here. A serious house, on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized, and robed as destinies, and that much never can be obsolete. Since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious, and gravitating with it to this ground, which, he once heard, was proper to grow wise in. If only that so many dead lie round.
Age. My age fallen away like white swaddling floats in the middle distance, becomes an inhabited cloud. I bend closer, discern a lighted tenement scuttling with voices. Oh, you tall game, I tired myself with joining. Now I wade through you like knee-level weeds, and they attend me, dear translucent bergs, silence and space. By now so much has flown from the nest here of my head that I needs must turn to know what prints I leave, whether of feet or spore of pads or a bird's adept splay. And they attend me, dear translucent bergs, silence and space. By now so much has flown from the nest here of my head that I needs must turn to know what prints I leave, whether of feet or spore of pads or a bird's adept splay.
Myxomatosis. Caught in the centre of a soundless field while hot inexplicable hours go by. What trap is this? Where were its teeth concealed? You seem to ask. I make a sharp reply, then clean my stick. I'm glad I can't explain just in what jaws you were to separate. You may have thought things would come right again, if you could only keep quite still and wait.
Toads by Philip Larkin. Why should I let the toadwork squat on my life? Can't I use my wit as a pitchfork and drive the brute off? 6 days of the week it soils with its sickening poison, just for paying a few bills. That's out of proportion. Lots of folk live on their wits. Lecturers, lispers, losers, loblolly men, louts, they don't end as paupers. Lots of folk live up lanes with fires in a bucket, eat windfalls and tin sardines. They seem to like it. Their nippers have got bare feet, their unspeakable wives as skinny as whippets, and yet no one actually starves. Ah, were I courageous enough to shout, "Stuff your pension!" But I know all too well that's the stuff that dreams are made on. For something sufficiently toad-like squats in me too. its hunkers are heavy as hard luck and cold as snow, and will never allow me to blarney my way of getting the fame and the girl and the money all in one sitting. I don't say one body's the other, one spiritual truth, but I do say it's hard to lose either when you have both.
Poetry of departures. Sometimes you hear, fifth hand, as epitaph, he chucked up everything and just cleared off. And always the voice will sound certain you approve this audacious, purifying, elemental move. And they are right, I think. We all hate home and having to be there. I detest my room, its specially chosen junk, the good books, the good bed, and my life in perfect order. So, to hear it said, he walked out on the whole crowd, leaves me flushed and stirred, like, then she undid her dress, or, take that, you bastard. Surely I can if he did. And that helps me to stay sober and industrious. But I'd go today, yes, swagger the nut-strewn roads, crouch in the forecastle, stubbly with goodness, if it weren't so artificial. Such a deliberate step backwards, to create an object, books, china, a life reprehensibly perfect.
Triple Time by Philip Larkin. This empty street, this sky to blandness scoured, this air, a little indistinct with autumn like a reflection, constitute the present, a time traditionally soured, a time unrecommended by event. But equally they make up something else. This is the future furthest childhood saw, between long houses under travelling skies, heard in contending bells, an air lambent with adult enterprise. And on another day will be the past, a valley cropped by fat, neglected chances that we insensately forbore to fleece. On this we blame our last threadbare perspectives, seasonal decrease.
Spring. Green-shadowed people sit or walk in rings. Their children finger the awakened grass. Calmly, a cloud stands. Calmly, a bird sings. And flashing like a dangled looking-glass, sun lights the balls that bounce, the dogs that bark, the branch-arrested mist of leaf, and me, threading my pursed-up way across the park, an indigestible sterility. Spring, of all seasons, most gratuitous, is fold of untaught flower, is race of water, is earth's most multiple, excited daughter. And those she has least use for see her best. Their paths grown craven and circuitous, their visions mountain clear, their needs immodest.
Deceptions. Of course I was drugged, and so heavily I didn't regain my consciousness till the next morning. I was horrified to discover that I had been ruined, and for some days I was inconsolable and cried like a child to be killed or sent back to my aunt. Mayhew, London Labour and the London Poor. Even so distant, I can taste the grief, bitter and sharp with stalks he made you gulp. The sun's occasional print, the brisk, brief worry of wheels along the street outside where bridal London bows the other way, and light unanswerable and tall and wide forbids the scar to heal and drives shame out of hiding. All the unhurried day, your mind lay open like a drawer of knives. Slums, years have buried you. I would not dare console you if I could. What can be said, except that suffering is exact, But where desire takes charge, readings will grow erratic. For you would hardly care that you were less deceived out on that bed than he was, stumbling up the breathless stair to burst into fulfilment's desolate attic.
I remember. Coming up England by a different line for once, early in the cold new year, we stopped, and watching men with number plates sprint down the platform to familiar gates. "Why, Coventry!" I exclaimed. "I was born here." I leant far out and squinted for a sign that this was still the town that had been mine so long, but found I wasn't even clear which side was which. From where those cycle crates were standing, had we annually departed for all those family holes? A whistle went. Things moved. I sat back, staring at my boots. "Was that," my friend smiled, "where you have your roots?" "No, only where my childhood was unspent," I wanted to retort, "just where I started." By now, I got the whole place clearly charted. Our garden first, where I did not invent blinding theologies of flowers and fruits, and wasn't spoken to by an old hat. And here we have that splendid family I never ran to when I got depressed. The boys all biceps and the girls all chest, their comic Ford, their farm where I could be really myself. I'll show you, come to that, the bracken, where I never trembling sat, determined to go through with it, where she lay back and all became a burning mist. And in those offices my doggerel was not set up in blunt 10-point, nor read by a distinguished cousin of the mayor, who didn't call and tell my father, "There before us had we the gift to see ahead." "You look as if you wished the place in hell," my friend said, "judging from your face." "Oh well, I suppose it's not the place's fault," I said. "Nothing, like something, happens anywhere."
Absences. Rain patters on a sea that tilts and sighs. Fast-running floors collapsing into hollows, tar suddenly, spray hard. Contrariwise, a wave drops like a wall. Another follows, wilting and scrambling, tirelessly at play, where there are no ships and no shallows. Above the sea, the yet more shoreless day, riddled by wind, trails lit up galleries. They shift to giant ribbing, sift away. Such attics cleared of me, such absences.
His face. Let his face, so effortless, your great arrival at my eyes. No one standing near could guess your beauty had no home till then. Precious vagrant, recognize my look and do not turn again. Admirer and admired embrace. On a useless level, where I contain your current grace, you my judgment. Yet to move into real untidy air brings no lasting attribute. Bargains, suffering, and love. Not this always planned salute. Lies grow dark around us. Will the statue of your beauty walk? Must I wade behind it till something's found? Or is not found far too late for turning back? Or, if I will not shift my ground, is your power actual? Can denial of you duck and run, stay out of sight and double round, leap from the sun with mask and brand and murder, and not understand?
If my darling were once to decide not to stop at my eyes, but to jump, like Alice, with floating skirt into my head, She would find no tables and chairs, no mahogany claw-footed sideboards, no undisturbed embers. The tantalus would not be filled, nor the fender seat cosy, nor the shelves stuffed with small printed books for the Sabbath, nor the butler bibless, the housemaid's lazy. She would find herself looped with the creep of varying light, monkey brown, fish grey, a string of infected circles loitering like bullies about to coagulate. Delusions that shrink to the size of a woman's glove, then sicken inclusively outwards. She would also remark the unwholesome floor, as it might be the skin of a grave from which ascends an adhesive sense of betrayal. A Grecian statue kicked in the privates, money, a swill tub of finer feelings. But most of all she'd be stopping her ears against the incessant recital intoned by reality, larded with technical terms, each one double-yoked with meaning and meaning's rebuttal. For the skirl of that bulletin unpicks the world like a knot. And to hear how the past is past and the future neuter might knock my darling off her unpriceable pivot.
Obedient daily dress. You cannot always keep that unfakeable young surface. You must learn your lines. Anger, amusement, sleep. These few forbidding signs. Of the continuing course sand-laden wind, time you must thicken. Work loose into an old bag, carrying a soiled name. Parch then, be roughened, sag. And pardon me that I could not find when you were new, no brash festivity to wear you at, such as clothes are entitled to, till the fashion changes.
Arrivals, departures. This town has docks where channel boats come sliding, tame water lanes, tool sheds, the traveller sees, his bag of samples knocking at his knees, and hears, still under slackened engines gliding, his advent blurted to the morning shore. And we, barely recalled from sleep there, sense arrivals lowing in a doleful distance, horny dilemmas at the gate once more. Come and choose wrong, they cry. Come and choose wrong. And so we rise. At night again they sound, calling the traveller now, the outward bound. Oh, not for long, they cry. Oh, not for long. And we are nudged from comfort, never knowing how safely we may disregard their blowing, or if, this night, happiness too is going.
At grass. The eye can hardly pick them out from the cold shade they shelter in, till wind distresses tail and mane. Then one crops grass and moves about, the other seeming to look on, and stands anonymous again. Yet 15 years ago, perhaps 24 distances sufficed to fable them. Faint afternoons of cups and stakes and handicaps, whereby their names were artificed to inlay faded classic tunes. Silks at the start, against the sky, numbers and parasols, outside squadrons of empty cars and heat, and littered grass. Then the long cry hanging unhushed till it subside to stop-press columns on the street. Do memories plague their ears like flies? They shake their heads. Dusk brings the shadows, summer by summer all stole away. The starting gates, the crowd and cries, all but the unmolesting meadows. Almanacked, their names live. They have slipped their names, and stand at ease, or gallop for what must be joy, and not a field glass sees them home, or curious stopwatch prophesies. Only the grooms and the groom's boy, with bridles in the evening come.
I hope you enjoyed this amazing recording. Thank you to all the people that have helped produce this podcast, particularly our trustee Chris Fletcher for bringing the marvellous Kate Blanchett along, and Simon Galloway for lending his professional hand to making sure the recording sounded fantastic. I would personally like to thank the Society trustees in general, who have worked so hard to make interesting connections with so many wonderful people who love Larkin as much as we do. I think the act of reading a poem out loud is a brave and magical thing to do, even for the most experienced of performers, and the trustees are thrilled to be able to present such a varied range of readers who span the arts, music and literature, PLS members, trustees and friends and supporters. Please have a look in the show notes if you're thinking, they sound familiar, or is that really who I think it is? They are as follows: Philip Pullen, Lynn Harrison, Julian Munrow, Brian Bilston, Daniel Wain, Michael Egan, Andrew Palmer, Greg Sestero, Joe Malago, Mary McCollum, Kate Blanchett, Melissa Dennison, Hannah Sullivan, David Byspiel, Tom Courtenay, Jane Blewett, Daniel Vince, Justine Gobert, Douglas Bell, Jacqueline Barron, Sinead Morrissey, Jerry Skeens, Alex Howard, Marco Peroni, Jeremy Whiteley, Julian Wilde. And on a final note, I'd like to say a special thank you to our chair, Rosie Millard, who was of enormous help with making the recording of Sir Tom Courtenay reading Churchgoing. Most of the readings here were done over Zoom or with our contributors recording themselves and sending the file over to me. However, Tom and Rosie did this the old school way, face-to-face in Tom's front room. Rosie found it so moving that she wrote an article about it, a link to which is in the show notes. Tom also recorded a reading of First Sight, which is not in the Less Deceived, but it's such a remarkable reading, I wanted to include it here. Thank you once again to Tom and Rosie for taking so much time and for your continued support for the Philip Larkin Society.
First Sight. Lambs that learn to walk in snow, when their bleating clouds the air, meet a vast unwelcome, no, nothing but a sunless glare. Newly stumbling to and fro, all they find outside the fold is a wretched width of cold. As they wait beside the ewe, her fleeces wetly caked, there lies, hidden round them, waiting too, earth's immeasurable surprise. They could not grasp it if they knew what so soon will wake and grow, utterly unlike the snow. I didn't expect that.
This podcast was produced by me, Lynn Lockwood and Gavin Hogg, and the music was The Horns of the Morning by the Mechanicals Band. If you have any questions, comments or ideas for future topics, then please, as ever, do get in touch.
Of the morning are blowing, are shining. The meadow is wet with the coldest of dew. The dawn reassembles